Welcome to r/malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel and for so many likes. The first story. Management started getting complaints from employees who had to deal with angry customers, and all because the company refused to pay me. The second story. New boss cost the company $58K because he refused to listen to me and made a big mistake. The third story. Company put us on a salary, so I followed the rules of the company, which had a bad effect on them. And the first story is truck driving on salary. This one is from decades ago, otherwise it would get me in deep doo-doo. I worked as a truck driver in the mid-90s. The company I worked for, can't name them here, but their favorite color is orange, decided to try out a new pay package. The details were complex, but it basically replaced the standard pay per mile with a set weekly salary, and not a good one. The new package was instituted on a small-scale trial. The company quickly realized that they could make a lot of money if they didn't have to pay their drivers, and the package became the company standard. Because of the complexity of the package, please don't ask, it took the drivers a few weeks to figure out we were getting screwed. Then we started fighting back. A couple of things you need to understand about a truck driver's work week. There are 4 lines on a DOT, Department of Transportation logbook. Lines 3 and 4 constitute the hours we can work daily and weekly. 10 hours, now 11 driving per day, 70 hours driving and other duties, line 4, 7-day week. In order to maximize our income, we put as little time as possible on line 4, for which we normally did not get paid, and logged the maximum legal speed on line 3, driving, even if we couldn't actually drive that speed, due to weather, traffic, terrain, etc. While this was, of course, illegal and impossible with current electronic logs, it wasn't a secret. As long as your logbook was neat and showed you driving at or under the speed limit, the DOT inspectors wouldn't give you a hard time about it. They had more than enough work with the drivers who were wildly abusing the rules. Once we were put on salary, weekly earnings drop of about 33%, we had no incentive to cheat. Examples. A run from Portland, Oregon to San Francisco, California is 635 miles. You could log this as 1 day at 550 miles, 55 miles per hour times 10 hours. Leaving you 85 miles. 85 over 55 is 1.75 hours logged the next day. That would leave you 8.25 hours to drive on day 2 after your delivery. Of course, the reality was quite different. There are some 300 miles of mountains along the route. With 45,000-pound load, you only averaged about 35 miles per hour through them. And anyone who has lived in the San Francisco Bay Area can tell you how likely you are to be able to drive 55 miles per hour at 8 a.m. Under the new pay package, we logged it as it actually happened. The result being that I would arrive in San Francisco in time to make my morning delivery, and be out of hours to run for the rest of the day, for which I had to be paid. Not only did the company have to pay me to sit for the day, they had usually booked a load for me for that day. It took a while for the load planners to catch on. That either had to be covered by another driver or lost entirely. Now all those things we had glossed over in order to keep moving got tossed into the company gears. You lost 3 hours throwing chains and driving across Mountain Pass at 25 miles per hour, and now you can't make a Friday delivery. So sorry, no more hours to drive. And the receiver isn't open on weekends? Not my problem. Cargo receivers didn't care much for it either. A lot of them would use the threat of not being unloaded in a timely manner to force drivers into abusive situations. I can remember with great fondness telling a number of them I didn't care if they ever unloaded me. I got paid the same either way. That got back to the company, but as long as I was complying with DOT rules, there was nothing anyone could do about it. Also removed one of the big hammers the company would use to threaten the drivers. That is a reduction in miles dispatched. Fleet managers sure didn't like that aspect of the pay package. All this occurred 6 months before my 3-year anniversary with the company. At the 3-year point, my 401k vested, and I got my last 2 weeks of vacation pay. I figured during that 6 months just about broke even on what I lost in wages. The salary pay package lasted about a year, before all the problems it caused forced the company to return to pay per mile. Just looking at that story title, I thought, this is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. Why your superiors decided to do this, I don't understand. I'm glad you decided to stick to the rules, and decide to tighten the screws in the company this way. A friend of mine worked for this company you mentioned for several years. From what I understand, they never learned how to cheat their drivers. He told me a lot of stories from his job. I hate it when a company tries to cheat their employees. More often than not, it's to their detriment. The company driver must drive when and where he's sent. If he doesn't have the hours or miles to do it, he has to figure it out. Companies don't seem to think this is their problem. The owner-operator has no guarantee of his next load, and when fuel prices go up, he makes significantly less money. I hope you find a better job for yourself and don't get into situations like this. The next story is, boss did not like the look of the bulk mailing stamp, told me to remove it. Cost the company over $220K. Back in the 1980s, I worked for a sporting goods company as a catalog designer. Small company, privately owned. I was the entire advertising department. I created 4 catalogs a year. These were responsible for most of our mail order sales, pre-internet, to the tune of around $700K a year. We sent the catalogs via bulk mail using a mailing service. This let us send them for a much discounted rate. To do this required the use of a bulk mail permit and placing the permit info on the mailing area of the catalog. Technically, it's called a fiche. Enter a new boss. Call him Ron. I was number 1, the only one in my department. For some reason, the company owner hired Ron as a favor to a friend. From day one, he was micromanaging, questioning everything, and screwing up my very tight schedule. This was before computers were common. Everything was by hand, literally typing out copy and reducing it on a photocopier to fit. Developing the photo film myself, making prints, etc. The actual printer had to add screens to the photos so they'd print, burn metal plates, and so on. All time-consuming and expensive. Deadlines could not be missed, so I was stuck with several 16-hour days come crunch time. I was complaining to the owner, but he really couldn't care less. I really wanted to stick it to Ron, and the opportunity presented itself. Constant threats of my way or you're fired were getting to me. The latest summer pre-catalog was done. Summer was our big season. I had to give him my mock-up, photocopied sheets stapled together, of the final catalog for his approval. A new step added after he demanded it. He looked at it and sent it back with several pointless revisions, and a note to remove that ugly permit box because it was not needed. Where he worked previously stuffed their mailers in envelopes. The envelopes had the fiche, but their mailer did this last step. I simply asked him to initial the changes, as this was the final approved version and was going to the printer the next day. There was no time to check it again. So he did. I knew it would be a total miss, and it's something I would never have done in the past. 50,000 catalogs printed and shipped directly to the mailer. The day they arrived at the mailer, the boss gets a call from the sales rep. "We can't mail your catalogs." Boss storms into my area of the building and is literally screaming. Ron is now peeved and yelling at me, joined by the boss. I swear, spittle and froth, vein bulging, screaming. Minimum 2-week delay. Wasted money, lost sales. I explain what happened, the threat to fire me, and show the owner the changes to the final copy, initialed by Ron. He was going to give Ron a second chance until the bill came in from the printer. They had to stamp 50,000 catalogs by hand. We had to rent their permit, since that was what was on their stamp. Rental and labor was almost $8,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's $20,000. Plus, our early summer sales boost was off by almost $50K from previous years, or $200K adjusted for inflation. Ron was fired. I was left alone after that. I never received an apology. I stayed for several more years, but the boss's temper kept getting worse. Edit. They said the only option was to hand stamp them. I actually stopped by to see what was going on. 6 employees, several tables, hand stamping every catalog. Executive mailing service in Illinois, still in business today. Before them, we used a system that required aluminum plates, about index card size. We'd place these in a machine and use a typewriter-style machine to manually stamp the card. These would then be stacked and dropped in a machine that would use them to apply the address. Going to a mailing service that could use computer tapes, high-tech at the time, was a huge step up. Ron got what he deserved. It would have been strange if they had kept him on after such a fiasco. The company lost a lot of money. I'm glad this company did the right thing and found Ron guilty. That's why the boss makes a lot of money, because he also has to be held accountable for any wrongdoing by his team. Hired Ron as a favor to a friend. So begins this steep, slippery slope. I don't understand when new people come in, why they can't leave something that works in place. There's a system that's already in place. Why change anything? Literally, I want it done my way. Let's do it your way, okay? After a while, they get fired and you go back to the way things were. You think they'd be learning. Tip for the future. If someone agrees to do what you ask, but only if you give it to them in writing, you're screwed. Haha, that's a fact. The last story is, that's not how the world works. So this happened more than 14 years ago, but I don't remember exactly how long ago. It involves myself and a Canadian-American office supply chain store that almost rhymes with maple syrup. A little bit of backstory is necessary before we get to the meat though. It's lengthy, so I hope you don't mind. Way back when, in the stone age of my IT career, I was hired as a floor associate for this office supply store. It wasn't the position I'd applied for, but that'll change later. I applied for a position as an in-store computer tech. It wasn't long before my aptitude for the internal workings of computers became apparent. And one day, the store manager asked me into the tech office to help deal with the massive backlog of computers in for service that the actual tech, who only worked a few hours a week, couldn't handle. I went through these tickets in relatively short order, turning the machines around and clearing the bench, so to speak. At this point, the store decided to make me full-time tech. That was fine by me. That's what I wanted in the first place. Unfortunately, when you let computers languish as long as this store had and never do any marketing, the business doesn't come in very fast. I'd already moved to have some aggressive in-store marketing done by floor associates, along with enforcing certain company policies that relaxed before, and things started to slowly turn around. Not fast enough for the store, though, who cut my hours back to 3 days a week. I applied for and worked other jobs to make up the difference. Over the next several months, I gradually built the store's tech services up from being bottom of the barrel to one of the top grossing stores in the region, edging out larger and more well-established stores. We had a reputation for fast and efficient service, along with saving the customer time and money by handling anything that didn't require the warranty department in store. This further increased our store profits, and it wasn't long before the district manager took notice and gave recognition to me personally. Of course, all this effort comes at a cost, and it wasn't long before my day was full, from beginning to end. I was still working the other part-time job, which offered higher pay, but fewer hours, so it balanced out to being equal to the store job on fewer days. So I couldn't add more days to my store schedule without sacrificing my weekend, something I was unwilling to do. I started working extra hours, usually clocking in a shift anywhere from 10 to 14 hours. Business continued to explode, and it wasn't long before I was working lunches at my workbench too. Throughout all this, the store never bothered to hire a second tech. I didn't mind. I got paid, and it averaged out to a full 5-day job, and it was pennies compared to the money I was directly making the store. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. After about 6 months of this, the department manager came to me and stated that they could no longer afford to pay me overtime, despite TechWorks sales being higher than that store had ever seen, and my pay still being less than or equal to what they'd have to pay me to work full-time for them. They didn't even offer to put me back to full-time and/or raise my pay, just told me to clock out at my scheduled time. So I did. I clocked out and went home, right when I was scheduled. Computer on the bench? It got left until my next workday. Ticket not updated? Maybe the notes are on my desk and I clocked out before entering them into the system. I was always gone by my scheduled time, not a minute later. I also stopped working on my lunch break. Work times on the bench went through the roof, and it wasn't long before management started getting complaints from floor associates, who had to deal with angry customers not having their computers within a respectable length of time. One even called head office to complain after their computer was sitting with no news for 2 weeks. It was only 3 weeks and a huge disaster later that they finally relented and said I could work as long as I wanted. It didn't last, and a few months later I transferred stores before quitting for greener fields entirely. I still drive by that store and wonder how well they're doing without me, and it's been 11 years. They refused to pay you for your overtime, so their business began to decline. Maybe they didn't expect you to do so much work and thought that not paying you had no effect on business. They were wrong. I think with the knowledge you have, you can start your own computer repair business. They probably could have turned you into a subsidiary. Instead, they kept you on your horses until you left. This just shows you that most corporate structures are either self-destructive in the long run or survive only through the betrayal and tears of people. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications. Have a good day!